an honor to be your speaker this afternoon, and I look forward to continuing on in our Old Testament study. And we're looking at, we're toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Chapter 28 is primarily what we'll be going over, but we're going to be covering a few other passages around here, Deuteronomy 27 and a few passages beyond that, but primarily in Deuteronomy 28. And we're talking about the blessings and curses that God pronounces upon Israel. Blessings if they obey Him, curses if they disobey Him. And so we'll get into that a little bit further into the study. I want to give a little bit of background, though. Just want to give a little bit of background as far as the map. I showed this on our last study, but we're going to look at just briefly, where we can retrace the steps of the children of Israel as they left Egypt, crossed the Red Sea, went down to Mount Sinai, and then we remember as they went up toward the east, how they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And then eventually where they land is the plains of Moab. And so that's primarily where these events are taking place in the book of Deuteronomy. And to zoom in on this a little bit more, if we were to look that top right corner, the Dead Sea, as we zoom in on that, the north side of the Dead Sea, where we see the Jordan River, Israel is camped on the east side of the Jordan, and they are just about to cross over the Jordan River and take the Promised Land, and Jericho being one of those first places that they conquer. And so that kind of sets the stage a little bit, but I do want to give a little bit of background as far as the book of Deuteronomy itself. Of course, it's written by Moses. He's divinely inspired by God to write this book. We mentioned the location is on the plains of Moab, right before they cross the Jordan River. And it's interesting, the time here, as you start the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 1, it mentions that this is the 11th month of the 40th year since the Exodus. Recall at Kadesh Barnea with the children of Israel's sin, that they are doomed to wander the wilderness for 40 years. So here we see that it's the 39th year and 11th month that event took place. And, they are here just a month away from being able to conquer the Promised Land. Now, the purpose of Deuteronomy, this might simplify it just a little bit. There's a few different themes that are covered, but I think you can kind of sum it up in 3 points. First of all, Moses points out the history. It was to be a reminder of the things that had taken place over the last 40 years. So he covers a lot of those major events going back to Egypt, and we'll talk about some of those things as well. But he covers the history in around the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy, and wants to call to their attention what all God has brought them through. He also wants to remind them of the lessons learned along the way. It's a reminder of the things that they should have learned from their experiences and to recall to their memory all of those events. And he also takes the opportunity to reiterate the law to them. He's dealing with a new generation here. We had the generation at Mount Sinai. Those passed away. They were those that were 20 years old and above. We know we're doomed to wander the wilderness and would never be able to enter into the Promised Land. And so he's dealing with another generation here, and he's wanting to relay to them the lessons they should have gained along the way. And he also has a warning here. It's a reminder that they must remain faithful to Jehovah if they hope to receive His blessings. And I took this from the commentary that Bob and Sandra Waldron have on their Old Testament commentaries. And so these are the primary things that Moses wants to relay to this group of people. If you think about it, he himself has only a month to live. He's a month away from, he won't be able to cross into the Promised Land with them. And so he's got about a month to upload all of this information that he wants to upload to them and to relay to them. And as we transition to that thought, these are Moses' final words, some of his final words. There's still a few chapters remaining in Deuteronomy, but these are some of the final things that he'll leave the children of Israel with. And as I mentioned, he could not enter the Promised Land due to his mistake. He was doomed to watch on from Mount Nebo as the children crossed into the Promised Land, but he himself could not. And as I mentioned, he only had a month to live. He was about 120 years old at this point. He had spent the last 40 years helping them navigate through all of the struggles of the wilderness. He was the mediator between them and God as well. Whenever they slipped up, it was him that went to bat for them, and he went before God to try to plead for their forgiveness and for them to be for them to be forgiven of those things. And so he's no longer going to be with them. He's no longer going to be able to protect them, so to speak, or to mediate on their behalf. He's going to have to send them on, and they'll make their decisions along the way. But he wants to give them stern warning and to give them a last few bits of instruction. He's also renewing the covenant with Israel. As I mentioned, he's dealing with another generation than he did at Mount Sinai. So he's dealing with the generation that, as I mentioned, those that were 20 years old and above at the sin of Kadesh Barnea, they would not be permitted to enter in. And so those that were 19 and younger would be permitted, except for Moses himself, Caleb, and Joshua. Those would be the three exceptions to that rule. And so all of this new generation, they would still remember, though, the events they went through, the bondage they were in Egypt. They would remember wandering, of course, in the wilderness. And those that were oldest, those that were 19 at the event of Kadesh Barnea, would now be almost touching their 60th birthday. And so he wants them all to remember these things and to review this covenant with them. He's reminding them that they're going to be heading into a new environment. They're going to be heading into a land that's plentiful, but also there's going to be foreign influences there. They're going to be going among the Amorites, the Canaanites. There's others there that could negatively impact them. And so there's going to be a new environment, and along with that is going to come some new challenges. They're going to be challenged to, try to steer clear of foreign gods, of idolatry, of complacency. They've went through the wilderness for so long depending upon God, and now they've got the opportunity to enter this land of abundance, and they could easily become complacent. They could forget about God. God knows that that's what they're going to do, and so he's reminding them and letting them know ahead of time, hey, there's going to be some challenges along the way. So it's very important, these final words that he leaves with them. And as we recall some of these stories, he relays to them, just remember what God brought you through when you were in bondage in Egypt for 400 years. Several generations covered there. He brought you out of that. He parted the Red Sea, and they were able to cross by dry land, and then they were able to make it to Mount Sinai. They were able to escape the Egyptians. But of course, it wasn't long before, just about a month or two after that event, that they, as Moses is on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving the covenant from God, receiving the 10 Commandments, he comes down to find them that they've made a golden calf for themselves to worship. And so immediately we see them sin. And so we see some victories, we see some failures along the way. I mentioned Kadesh Barnea. This was the event, as you might recall, where they had the opportunity to go in and seize the promised land right off the bat. Shortly after Mount Sinai, they were able to go to Kadesh Barnea, which was the staging ground, so to speak, for the conquest of Canaan, or was supposed to be. But instead, the spies came back, gave the report. The people were terrified because there were giants in the land. There were well-fortified cities, and they were afraid to conquer the land. So they said, no, we're not going to do it. And it was because of that God punished them, and that those that were 20 years old and above would not be able to enter in, and they would have to wander the wilderness for 40 years. And so we see that they spend all that time simply just waiting for a generation to die until they can ultimately enter into the promised land. And so Moses is recalling to them all of this history. He's reminding them of what all they've gone through. He also reminds them that as they grew closer to God, as they grew closer to obeying his commands, God granted them some victories. Sihon, king of the Amorites, he reminds them in Deuteronomy chapter 2 that they were able to conquer him and all of his lands. Also Og, who was a giant, they feared the giants. They were able to conquer a king who was a giant himself, the king of Bashan. And so Moses reminds them of all of the victories they've had along the way as well. So he spends all of this time, again, uploading this information to them so that they can carry along from here on out with this knowledge, so that when they do doubt, when they reach times where they're discouraged, they can remember what all God has brought them through. And so that, as we reflect on that, the first 4 chapters of Deuteronomy roughly covers the history. Chapters 5 through roughly chapter 26 is Moses relaying to them the law and the commandments. And also he kind of is expounding on that so that they're going to be prepared for all of the new challenges. They can apply the law to their future worship, everything they're going to be going through in the new land. And then we reach this point, Deuteronomy 28, the subject primarily of our sermon this evening, where he talks about these blessings and curses. Again, blessings for obeying God. We see that in Deuteronomy chapter 28, the first 14 verses. And here we see recorded 14 blessings. He takes 14 verses, roughly about 428 words, if you're looking at the New King James Version, to relay these 14 blessings on the people. Then he spends the remainder of the chapter talking about the curses that they would incur if they disobeyed God. There were 32 curses as opposed to 14 blessings, and he spends 54 verses and over 1,600 words in order to describe these curses. So he spends 4 times as much energy, emphasis, and words on the curses that would come if they disobeyed God versus the blessings. And so it's about a 4-to-1 ratio of relaying these things. And so he's placing a lot of emphasis on this because he knows this people. He knows how disobedient they've been in the past. He knows their character. He's traveled with them for 40 years. So I think he knows to cover more of the curses that they're going to incur because he wants to leave that as the lasting impression for them. We won't be reading all of these verses. It would take up all of our time to cover that, but I do encourage you to go home and read Deuteronomy 28. It will give you such a greater appreciation for the God that we serve, for the obedience that he requires, and for the consequences of disobedience. And it places you more in the mindset of God. So I do highly encourage you to go home, if you haven't already, and read Deuteronomy 28 and just see exactly the comparison between blessings and curses. And after reading through the curses, it really does just make you just immediately want to do better as a Christian, as a servant of God in our day and age. So, but we'll read the blessings. We're going to read the first 14 verses here of Deuteronomy 28. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before your face. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your storehouses and in all to which you set your hand. And he will bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, just as he has sworn to you. If you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways, then all peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord and shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, and in the produce of your ground, in the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the works of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not beneath. And if you heed the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and are careful to observe them, so you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or the left, to go after other gods, to serve them. And so here we see the incredible blessings that await the children of Israel if they obey God. They're going to face a lot of challenges along the way that are going to steer them away. As he mentions there in verse 14, there's going to be other gods they're going to be encouraged to follow instead of God Almighty. And so, but if they remain faithful, there's going to be blessings that follow. But as I mentioned, he spends 4 times as much time talking about the curses that will follow. And I want to point out some of these key curses that will come upon the children of Israel if they disobey. The Lord will make the plague cling to you until he has consumed you from the land which you are going to possess. The Lord will strike you with consumption, with fever, with inflammation, with severe burning fever, with the sword, with scorching, and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish. In verse 25, the Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. Verse 31, your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your donkey shall be violently taken away from before you, and shall not be restored to you. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and you shall have no one to rescue them. And then I think what really hits home for me as a parent is verse 32. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, and your eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all day long, and there shall be no strength in your hand. When we think about the impact that these curses have, you would think that it would scare this people to the point of never disobeying God. But especially here when they consider that their sons and daughters would be taken away by a foreign people and they would never see them again. Verse 38, you shall carry much seed out to the field, but gather little in, for the locust shall consume it. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder, and on your descendants forever. And then also we see in verses 49 through 68 the threat that they would face of captivity from foreign nations. And I think it is important to mention here how these curses don't just apply to the group of people that disobey God, but it would also negatively impact all of their descendants. And so some serious curses and warnings that are brought before the children of Israel at this time. And as we think about God's blessings and curses, both are a reflection of his fairness. If we obey him, we know we're going to be blessed. If we disobey him, we know that there's consequences that we're going to face. He's a just God. And if we do what we're supposed to do, we know that he's going to treat us with fairness. But if we disobey him, we know that there's consequences coming. Blessings, they reinforce his faithfulness and his goodness. And also curses emphasize his justice and his requirement of obedience. And it was also a reminder to the people, I've kind of touched on this already, but it was a reminder to the people that all these blessings were things that they could find great confidence in whenever they found themselves in situations where they were challenged, where they were discouraged, where they were down. They could count on thinking about his blessings and things to come. But the curses would be a reminder if they ever reached a point to where they were complacent, if they were ever reaching a point of comfort and where they forgot about God, they should remember the curses that would come upon them. And also as we reflect on this and the contingency upon their obedience to God, there would be consequences if they obeyed. Again, there would be blessings and curses if they disobeyed. That's ultimately the point of the whole message this evening is blessings will follow obedience. Curses will follow disobedience. Moses also knew that they were going to need some reminders. Again, he was only a month away from departing from them and going up to Mount Nebo and very quickly after that passing away. So he wanted to establish some reminders. And of course, God divinely inspired him to give these reminders to Israel. In Deuteronomy 27, he talks about the blessings and the curses that were to be pronounced by the people. This was something that was going to serve as a reminder for them. And Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal were the two locations that he references there. And as we reflect back on this, it was after the children of Israel crossed over the Jordan that they were to take part in this ceremony. This is a modern-day view of what Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal look like. Mount Gerizim on the left is where half of the tribes would go up and pronounce the blessings. Mount Ebal is where they would go up and pronounce the curses, and it was also where they would go up and make plaster. And as the plaster was drying, they would write the law on these huge tablets of stone, and they would set on top of Mount Ebal as a continual reminder. And also I'm told I read from one commentator that this area formed a natural amphitheater so that if one person was shouting on one mountaintop, they would be able to hear it in the valley below and also on the other mountaintop. And so this was an area to where it would serve as a reminder for them to remember the blessings and the curses from God, depending on how they obeyed him or disobeyed him. There was another reminder as well, as we read in Deuteronomy 31, verses 9 through 13, that the law would need to be read every 7 years. So this was another reminder for the people, another commandment they were given. And so these reminders Moses installs in their practice after they cross over the Jordan, and also every 7 years he gives these two reminders. Also, he gives them warnings. This is I think a good way to kind of cap off some of Moses' comments. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 19 and 20. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, and that you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. He's telling them that you're going to go into this new land. You're going to face all of these challenges, and you're going to be tempted. And he says you need to make the decision now before you put yourself in that situation. Are you going to serve God? You've got a choice between life and death, between these blessings and these curses. And you need to make the decision now before you even cross the Jordan River. So he gives them these warnings. Of course, spoiler alert here, God does predict Israel's rebellion already in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 14 through 29. And so right after Moses has told all of these things to the people, God comes to Moses and he tells them, pretty soon you're going to pass away, but these people are soon going to depart from my way, and they're going to seek after foreign gods. They're going to forget all about me once they reach this land. And certainly that was probably a discouraging message to Moses after he had led them for 40 years. Only to receive this piece of information that they would rebel. But of course, Moses knew to the people's heart, and he knew that they were likely to rebel anyway. But God predicts that in Deuteronomy 31. We also see the consequences of disobedience. I mentioned toward the end of Deuteronomy 28 that they would be subject to captivity from foreign nations if they disobeyed, and we see that play out. And this is just one passage that we can read that kind of illustrates that. Psalm 137, verses 1 and verse 4. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? Here they were. This is a record of them being in Babylon, and the mindset of the people. It's just as he predicted in Deuteronomy 28, the curses that they would endure, the captivity that they would endure because of their disobedience. But Moses also points out in Deuteronomy 30 that when they do steer away from God, when they do diverge away from his way, there are blessings when they return to God. And so he does let them know that, hey, even though once you get away from God, once you depart and you're held captive in these foreign nations, there is an opportunity to come back if your heart will turn back to him. So he does leave them with some encouraging words as well when they do disobey. And we see things play out throughout the Old Testament. Prophets that are in the Old Testament that are to come will often use a lot of this language that we see in Deuteronomy 28, talking about the curses and using some of that similar phrases. And one of these prophets I wanted to point out is Haggai. It's one of the prophets that I'm the most familiar with, and so I just wanted to use this one to kind of illustrate that point. Haggai, his purpose was to speak to the remnant after the exile. So we're fast forwarding through the Old Testament here for just this one example. But once the people are split into two kingdoms, it's a divided kingdom. They're taken into captivity. One half is taken under Babylonian captivity, but they're permitted eventually to come back to rebuild the temple of God. But they've lost their focus. They spent a couple of years building the foundation, but then just quickly forgot about it. They got busy doing their own things, pretty much. They got busy on their own personal priorities. He says you're focusing on building your paneled houses instead of rebuilding the house of God. And so he helps to refocus their priorities. He points out the unfruitfulness of what they had done. He points out just how unfruitful, focusing on themselves, their own needs, how unfruitful that was. He says when you're out in the field and you're gathering up the grain, or when you go to the barn to get the grain or get your food, there's often less than half of what you're expecting. All of these things are coming to nothing. And you try to fill up a bag, but you're filling up a bag with holes. It's a fruitless work that you're doing because you're not working for God. And so we challenge them to do God's work. And in doing so, they would have a glorious future if they would obey him. And so this is just one prophet of many that we could look at that reminds the children of Israel, uses this phrasing to remind them that curses follow disobedience, but blessings follow obedience. As we reflect on I'm kind of skipping ahead here. As we go back to the end of Deuteronomy, Moses has a month left. He delivers this message to the people. Then we see that he passes away on Mount Nebo. But before he does, he appoints Joshua to be the leader of the children of Israel, who's going to lead this conquest. And I don't know who's going to teach on that message, but I want to just point out the final words of Joshua because they sound very, very similar to the final words of Moses. And I think it helps to kind of wrap up our message this evening. But after they've conquered the land and after they've divided it up among the 12 tribes, Joshua takes this point. He's near the end of his life after they divided everything up and the people are going to go away to their own land. Before they do, he gives them one last reminder while he's got them all gathered together. Joshua 24, verses 14 and 15. Now therefore fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth. Put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Certainly a very popular phrase that we see in a very popular passage, but I think it's very fitting for us to end on the final words of Joshua as well as we reflect on the final words of Moses. They're challenged to choose between life and death, to choose for themselves who they're going to serve. And that same reminder is given for us today as we reflect on who we're going to be as servants of God. And if you've never obeyed the gospel, then we certainly want to encourage you to make that choice. You've got a decision between eternal life and eternal death. You've got that opportunity to choose between blessings and curses. Are you going to become a child of his and obey him and be faithful till the end of your days? Or will you continue to serve your own gods and the idolatry of our day and age, serving self? As we reflect on all these things, certainly it's a good crossroads for us to kind of recognize where we're at and what we're serving in this day and age, and to realize that there's blessings that await us if we serve God faithfully until the end, but there's also eternal curses as well. And thanks be to God that he gave us his only begotten Son so that he would endure the curses that we didn't have to endure, and that we can enjoy the blessings that only Jesus deserved. And so thankfully we've got access to eternal life. But if you've never obeyed the gospel, we encourage you to do that. Or if you are a Christian and have made some wrong or need to make something right before the congregation, please come as we stand and sing.